Imagine waking up one morning, right? And finding out your salary hasn't just gone up by the standard 3 or 4%. Actually, scratch that. It hasn't just gone up. It has literally multiplied. Well, for roughly 48 lakh central government employees and nearly 68 lakh pensioners in India, this isn't some corporate fantasy. It's a decadal reality, and it's called the Central Pay Commission. Right now, India is gearing up for the 8th Pay Commission. It's this massive policy overhaul that happens every 10 years to completely revise government salaries, allowances, and pensions. But here's the thing. This isn't just an HR update. It's a colossal financial event. But, that's really only part of the story. Take a look at the number 69,000 rupees. That staggering figure is the new proposed minimum basic pay for government workers. This is being heavily championed by the National Council Joint Consultative Machinery, or NCJCM, which is the apex body representing employee unions. Now, to put that 69,000 into perspective, the current minimum basic pay is just 18,000 rupees. So we are talking about a potential increase of nearly 4 times the base salary, specifically for the lowest paid workers. So the crucial question we have to ask is this: how does a single government wage decision affect not just those millions of individual lives, but the entire national economy? Because at the end of the day, when the government writes a bigger paycheck, it has to find that money somewhere, right? This means this commission doesn't just impact government clerks or railway workers. No, it impacts inflation, it impacts the national debt, and ultimately, it impacts the taxes paid by everyday citizens. So let's dive into this explainer and see exactly how the gears of this massive machine actually turn. To really grasp the macro shock, we first need to look at the micromechanics, specifically understanding the multiplier. Now, the mathematical engine driving all of this is a very specific term, the Fitment Factor. If you're a government employee, this is absolutely the single most important number in your financial life right now. In simple terms, it's just a multiplier. The Pay Commission takes your existing basic pay, multiplies it by this Fitment Factor, and boom, there is your new revised salary. It's a mathematical formula designed to account for 10 years of inflation, cost of living adjustments, and the overall national economic growth. Let's look at a real-life example to see why this multiplier is so fiercely debated right now. Imagine a level 1 multitasking staff worker currently earning a basic pay of 18,000 rupees. If the government sticks to the standard precedent set by the previous 7th Pay Commission, they would use a multiplier of 2.57. In that scenario, that worker's new basic pay jumps to 46,260 rupees. Not bad, right? But then look at scenario B. If the government accepts the union's demand of a 3.68 multiplier, that exact same worker's pay absolutely rockets to 66,240 rupees. Guys, that is a massive difference of 20,000 rupees every single month, purely based on which decimal the commission chooses to run with. And this brilliantly illustrates why the unions are pushing so hard. They argue that the post-pandemic inflation surge has severely eroded their purchasing power over the last few years. Because of this, they aren't just asking for a higher fitment factor of 3.68 or even 3.83. They're actually proposing a sweeping overhaul of the whole system. They want to double the annual salary increment from 3% to 6%. They also want to merge pay matrix levels, for example, combining levels 2 and 3 or 4 and 5, to simplify the incredibly complex salary structure and ensure fairer promotions. At first glance, this sounds like a massive, game-changing win for workers. But there's another side to the story. Because salaries are really only half the equation. The real challenge begins with the great pension battle. We are looking at a brewing conflict between the state and its employees. On one hand, we have the Government Gazette's official mandate for the 8th Pay Commission. They are explicitly instructed to review the existing national pension system, the NPS, and the newly introduced Unified Pension Scheme, or UPS. The government's core focus here is on fiscal prudence, basically making sure the country can actually afford these payouts without breaking the bank. But on the flip side, the employees' demands are completely at odds with this. Prominent employee unions are demanding a complete rollback of both the NPS and the UPS. They want a full return to the old pension scheme, the OPS, which guaranteed predictable, non-contributory pension benefits. They argue the current market-linked systems create massive uncertainty for their retirements, and they want that guaranteed safety net back. And to show you just how deep this distrust runs, the government recently introduced the Unified Pension Scheme as kind of a middle ground. Yet out of nearly 26 lakh NPS subscribers, only about 1.22 lakh, that is a mere 4.5%, have actually opted for it. This reflects incredibly limited acceptance among the workforce for anything other than the old guarantees. So, We have demands for massive salary hikes and guaranteed pensions. But what happens when we zoom out? Let's take a macro deep dive into the fiscal shock. To truly understand the national impact, we can look at a fascinating macroeconomic simulation prepared by the Madras School of Economics for the 16th Finance Commission. This report effectively models what happens to the Indian economy if we assume just a 15% increase in other revenue expenditures due to the pay commission, starting in the 2026 to 2027 financial year. And it shows how drastically a wage hike shifts the national books. We're talking about the general government fiscal deficit, which is basically how much more the government spends than it actually earns. In a base case, with no major wage shocks, that deficit would sit around 7.62%. But if you inject that wage revision shock, it jumps to 8.91%. Even worse, if the government delays implementation and has to pay out years of accumulated arrears all at once, the deficit spikes to double digits for 2 years, eventually settling at a dangerous 9.32%. And higher deficits mean borrowing more money. This brings us to the public debt to GDP ratio. Think of this essentially as the national credit card balance compared to our total economic output. Without the pay shock, it's projected to be at 82.41%. But with the wage revision, the national debt burden significantly expands to 86.80%, and a delayed shock pushes it all the way to nearly 88%. So, while government salaries go up, the entire nation's debt burden expands, testing the absolute limits of India's fiscal capacity. This perfectly illustrates the government's massive headache right now. The FRBM Act of 2003, which is the law designed to keep government finances responsible, pushes for a public debt target of 75%. That's 50% for the union and 25% for the states. But as we just saw, this pay shock threatens to push that overall number all the way to 87.7%. It's a stark contrast between the government's goal to anchor debt and the reality of this impending massive payout. So, with the math looking incredibly tight, what actually happens next? Here is the timeline of events. The 8th Pay Commission is formally constituted in November 2025. The target effective date for the new salaries is set for January 1st, 2026. However, the Commission isn't expected to submit its final recommendations until mid-2027. So what does this mean for the workers? Well, it means they'll likely continue on their current pay through 2026, and when the report is finally approved in 2027, they'll receive their new salaries along with massive, backdated arrears, and that creates a huge, sudden outflow of cash from the government coffers down the line. To wrap up our data analysis, we have to remember what is at stake for the broader economy. As the Madras School of Economics report clearly notes, targeting public debt levels at 75% could ensure in excess of 7% economic growth with stable inflation. Fiscal discipline isn't just about balancing government spreadsheets. It's the foundation that keeps inflation low and ensures the wider economy continues to grow. And that growth is what benefits every single citizen, not just government employees. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. How will India walk the tightrope between fairly compensating its millions of workers to help them fight inflation while simultaneously preventing a national debt crisis? It is a massive economic balancing act that is absolutely going to shape India's fiscal future for the next decade. If you enjoyed this deep dive into India's economy, finance, and public policy, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know what topic you'd like us to explain next.